On the surface, the Wacky rig is the most basic bass fishing technique. You just hook a worm in the middle and go fishing. But if we dig a little deeper, you will realize there are many little tricks that will drastically increase the number of fish you catch with this technique. Today we will dive into all those tricks by taking you through the gear you need, how to rig it, and how to fish it to ensure you can catch more fish than everybody else on a Wacky rig. So let's first start with your gear selection. There's gonna be a few little tricks that you can change throughout your gear here that will help you catch more fish compared to what you might already be doing. But there will be a few small tricks that we're gonna show you out on the water after this in where and how you fish your bait to help you catch the most amount of fish possible. Overall, I fish a pretty standard spinning rod for my Wacky rig setup here. Nothing fancy about it whatsoever. It's a 2500 size spinning reel. I like the Shimano Sedona. It's a very good budget spinning reel. And then I have a Cash and Icon Ned rig rod here, but the thing to note is that this is just a 7-foot medium power fast action rod. That is really all you need. Something in that 6'6" to 7-foot range on a spinning rod with a medium backbone to it and a fast tip. It's going to give you the ability to make accurate casts, feel what that bait's doing even though it's weightless, and then if one actually picks it up, since we're going to be using a weedless hook, which we'll talk about here in a second, it'll give you just enough backbone to actually stick those fish and get them in the boat. And then the reel, just pick something with a very good drag. You're going to be using light lines, so if that fish pulls, you want to be able to have a good drag so you won't break off on that light line. Talking about line, this is where the first trick is going to come in with my Wacky rig setup. What I used to do is just put straight 8 or 10 pound fluorocarbon or monofilament on my spinning reel and go fishing. While that will work, what I've started doing is using lime green braid on here. This is going to give you a few different advantages, and it does not have to be lime green. You can use whatever color you want, preferably something high visibility. That's going to give you the most benefit of using braid here. Braid is thinner than fluorocarbon or monofilament, so you'll be able to get a longer cast with a light bait, especially when those fish are very finicky and can be scared by pressure or people in the general vicinity. If you can cast a little bit farther than everybody else, sometimes you'll get more bites than everybody else. The other thing braid is going to do is allow you to feel everything, so if a fish has picked up the bait, but more importantly, the high vis color, it will lay on top of the water because it floats and almost act as a strike indicator. And we will show you that on the water here just a little bit. What it's going to do is lay there, and as a fish takes it, you can see if it goes left or right. Sometimes you'll see the line dart or take off a little bit quicker, and you know that a fish has picked that bait up. Even though it's weightless, you don't have to feel the fish pick up the bait. You can visibly see it with that bright colored line. Now, if you're worried about the fish seeing the bright colored line, this is where I'm gonna go with my next tip. I tie a fluorocarbon leader on here, so I'm using Suffix Advanced. You can use whatever you want for your fluorocarbon leader, but I'm going to use 10 pound because we're going to be fishing in Florida in today's video, but I also use 8 pound a lot up here in the Northeast. You can even go down to 6 if you want to, but a lot of times I'm fishing a Wacky rig around cover. So 8 or 10 is a very good line size to give you enough abrasion resistance, but also be thin enough and small enough to get you a lot of bites. I tie about a 10 to 12 foot section on here. Basically, I have the knot sit right above the reel here. The line goes all the way out the rod tip and back to my hook holder. So on a 7-foot rod coming out above the handle here, you're somewhere around 12 foot of leader is about what I like to use. I tie it on with an FG knot, but you can use your favorite braid to fluorocarbon knot and it will work just fine. Whatever you have the most amount of confidence in, use that and it will give you the most amount of success. Just make sure you're using that fluorocarbon leader so that they don't see this lime green braid up here, and it will get you even more bites. All of the products are going to be linked in the description below. If you want to check any of them out, you can purchase them through those Tackle Warehouse links, and you'll be able to help the channel out a ton to continue making videos just like these for you. The last couple things we need is some terminal tackle here. So there's a few pieces that come to your gear here when you're rigging up a Wacky rig, which most people, when they start out, and which I did when I was very much starting out as well, they get a Wacky hook, which are like these circle style hooks here, and just hook a bait right in the middle and go fishing. If that's the way you like rigging it and you have success doing it, there's nothing wrong with that. I caught fish for years just hooking it right in the middle and throwing it out there. But as I learned some of these other tips, it will give you more longevity in your bait. it will allow your bait to perform properly, and more importantly, actually land more fish. So the first thing we're gonna do is get rid of this hook. While these hooks are great, there's a few downfalls to what these things bring to the table. And one of them is that the hook shank is just way too short. So if you hook a fish bigger than a pound or two, you're getting just skin hook and you're not actually gonna get behind the jawbone or anything like that. And it will lead to losing fish because you don't get a very good or deep hook set into that fish's mouth. And they're also a very narrow gap, so overall you're just gonna lose a couple more fish with this hook. What I noticed when I went to these VMC hooks here, these are the Redline Weedless Nico hooks. These things are incredible. Not only do these hooks have 2 fluorocarbon weed guards on here that will allow you to fish your bait in some heavier cover than you could with just your standard Wacky worm hook that's an open hook like that. This also has a much longer shank, so it's gonna get behind that fish's jawbone when you set the hook, and the keepers will actually sometimes fold out over their mouth and keep them on the hook better than if you just had an open hook. The other thing this thing does is it has a much larger gap between the shank of the hook and the tip of the hook, so you can get a little bit better penetration there. Overall, these things have been amazing for me since I made the switch from those old hooks to these Redline hooks here. I have landed so many more fish. This has been one of the biggest things that has changed my Wacky rig fishing, I promise you that. The next thing that has changed my Wacky rig fishing, I've made 3 evolutions now of this point on rings. The first thing I did, I started with no ring. I would just hook the bait in the middle and throw it out there. And oftentimes you would either catch 1 fish on a Senko and then your hook would rip right out, or sometimes you'd even catch no fish. If you made a bad cast or a little bit of a jerky motion, it could just rip through the Senko without even catching a fish because it had nothing to grip onto. So then I started using these regular circle O-rings, and while they worked great, they keep your bait on a little bit better, they hold your hook a little bit parallel with the bait instead of perpendicular, and overall they still only have like 1 shallow point of contact on your bait, so it rips through a lot easier when you actually hook a fish. It doesn't have a lot of longevity, and it doesn't keep your hook in place to give you the best hook sets. I have recently switched to these VMC crossover rings here, not only because I can use them for Nico rigging because they have 2 channels, but mostly because they have a wider base of contact onto your bait. So what happens is when you hook a fish, you can catch 4, 5, 6 fish on a worm because it's not pulling all that pressure when you hook a fish in one tiny spot on your worm. It's distributing it across a larger area, and it will keep your worm on the hook longer. And when you actually hook it through the correct channel, it will hold your hook perfectly perpendicular to the bait. So when a fish comes up and eats that, it has all the hook gap going right into its mouth, and you don't have to worry about it folding up on the worm weird or something like that and costing you some fish. Granted, you're not gonna land everything on a Wacky rig, but if you want to see your hookup ratio, more important, your land ratio, go way up, if you change to a crossover ring and the VMC Redline hooks, you're gonna see a huge difference right there, just in the number of fish you catch, not even getting more bites or less bites by the rest of the techniques we're about to talk about. Now, the last thing we gotta talk about before we can go fishing is your bait selection. I've talked about this numerous times on the channel. There's a very important thing that happens with a Wacky rig is your salt content in your bait. So the original Gary Yamamoto Senko, that is what started this entire technique. There is a ton of salt content in these baits, and what happens with that salt content is that it causes that bait to shimmy on the way down. The less salt content you have, the slower your bait will fall, and it will almost suspend, and some of them won't even have shimmy. They'll literally just fall horizontally, and they won't shake on the ends of the worm because they don't have enough salt content to fall fast enough to cause that shimmy. Not saying those worms will not catch fish, but if you want to see the most amount of success, pick a worm with a high salt content. So I have always used the original Gary Yamamoto Senkos. These things are amazing. And I have also been using the 6th Sense Clout. I do work with them, but they are also awesome baits. I have used them and caught a ton of fish on them as well. They have a great amount of salt content. A couple of the other ones that I've fished are the Bass Pro Stickos and even the Guggen Baits Lunker Log. I did a head-to-head test of Gary Yamamoto versus Guggen Baits Lunker Log. It's on my channel. Those 2 baits actually performed equally because they had the amount amount of salt content that you needed. I actually did another test where I tried a Big Bite Bait Senko against a Yamamoto Senko, and I outfished 10 to 1 on a Gary Yamamoto Senko. So your salt content does make a difference. I'm not saying they won't catch fish, but you will catch more fish with the right amount of salt content. So choose that correctly when you're picking your baits. But for now, we gotta get out on the water and get to fishing this thing to show you how to catch even more fish, because a lot of this comes down to your technique and where you're fishing it. So let's head out on the water and see what we can catch. But before we do that, if you can go down below and hit the subscribe button. Only about 15% of you that watch these videos are subscribed, and I'm trying to hit 100,000 by the end of 2025. I'm hoping for an amazing year this year. You guys have supported me a ton. So if you could hit that subscribe button down below to keep the channel growing, greatly appreciate it. But for now, let's get out on the water and teach you even more tips to catch more fish on a Wacky rig. So having the right setup with your Wacky rig is crucial to be able to catch a lot of fish with this rig. But the number one tip that we're about to walk through right here is all in your retrieve. That's actually what's going to catch you the most amount of fish with this bait. And my number one tip is less is more. The less you can fish this bait, the more you're going to catch. While you think a retrieve, usually you're trying to do something to your bait to get it to have action, you actually want to do nothing with this bait to get it to have the right action. So when you drop this in the water, if you look at it next to the boat, as it's falling very slowly like this, it just has a gentle shimmy on the way down. And that is what is the key to getting these fish to bite. No matter how pressured they are, no matter how hard they are to get to bite, that little shimmy sometimes will just entice the most lethargic fish. Now what I'm gonna do is walk you through my favorite retrieve here and how I like to work this bait, and then we're gonna fish this area and see if we can catch us a couple of fish. As you can see, we're in a very target-rich environment here, and that is crucial with a Wacky rig. You want to have a ton of targets to cast at, like this dock right in front of me, or we have some cattails and stuff over here. I actually just saw a fish jump right there. I'm gonna see if I can get him to bite it while we're talking through this, but I'll throw my bait at these targets and I'm just gonna let it sink. You can see I'm literally just letting my bait sink there as slow as possible, and I'm doing nothing, and I'm watching my line. Today it's a little bit tricky because the wind is blowing a little bit, but on those super calm, sunny days when you have no wind at all and the lake is like glass, you can watch that lime green braid we talked about. I'll literally lay a bunch of it on the water like a strike indicator, and I'll watch what it does. And the trick is that when that fish picks that up, that little suction effect into their mouth, you'll actually see your line dart forward a little bit, and then also that fish will be swimming with the bait, so you'll either see it swimming away, left, right, whatever that fish is doing, and know that that fish has it in its mouth, and you can reel up and set the hook and get a good hook set. The other thing the line is going to let you do is actually know when that bait is on the bottom, because then your retrieve is essentially over. You want it to sink all the way to the bottom. I'll lift it up and shake it a few times, and I'll let it fall back down to the bottom. So what I'll do is like throw it underneath this dock here, and I will lay my line on the water, and I'm gonna watch it and see what it does. And I can see it just slowly pulling line out, and it's still going, so I know it's sinking. It's about 5 foot under that dock, so it's gonna take a minute to get it down to the bottom, and it just laid slack back towards me. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reel up my slack, I'm gonna shake it a little bit and see if a fish has picked it up, which it hasn't, and I'll lay my line right back down on the water and let it take line again. And I know my bait's in the strike zone, so that's where I want to leave it. A fish might have come over and looked at it when it laid on the bottom, and sometimes when you pop it up off the bottom, that will get them interested to actually want to bite it. So once you pop it up a little bit, I'll let it sink one more time just to make sure that fish didn't bite it, and then I reel in and make another cast. You do not want to be leaving your Wacky rig, fishing it all the way back to the boat, anything like that. These fish are going to bite it or they're not. If you put it right in their face in a target-rich environment like this, they're either gonna bite it on the fall or that first hop, or you're not catching a fish on that cast. So I'll reel it back in and I'll make another cast, and it allows me to fish a Wacky rig very quickly and cover more water with it than other people could, which means I'll get more bites because I'm throwing it at more targets that a fish could be at. But that's the biggest thing. Do not work your Wacky rig at all. Cast it out and just let it sink. Don't even shake the thing or anything until it's laying on the bottom. Then I'll pick it up, see if anybody's home. Nobody's home, I'll let it lay on the bottom again, and I reel it back in and cast again, and always keep it next to cover. If you make a bad cast and you're like, oh, it's close to the cover, but not very, just reel it back in and cast again. You're gonna waste a lot of time if you let it lay there, if you know that there's not likely going to be a fish there, where if you bring it in and just cast again and get it next to a target, you have a more likely chance of catching a fish being next to a target. So let's fish this thing around and see what we can catch. There we go. Not a big one, but we got one finally. You can see I was just letting that thing lay on the bottom and he got it. Look at that. Ate the Wacky real good. You can see with that hook right there though, that hook gets way behind their jawbone like that. So they're never coming off like they would with a circle Wacky hook. You can see that thing's hooked in there good. Again, not a big one, but hopefully we'll get some much bigger than her. We're gonna throw her back and get back to it. There's a perfect target right here with this big dock with a bunch of shade and an opening in the grass. So all I did was throw my Wacky as far under there as I could, give it some slack and just let it lay. I let that thing sink all the way down to the bottom. It's in 5 foot. It's gonna take 4 or 5 seconds for it to hit the bottom anyway. So I just let it sit there. Don't move, don't let the bait, don't move your rod, don't do anything. And then when you lift up, sometimes there'll be one on there. Sometimes there won't be like that, but there might be some other ones on this dock. There we go. Another one. That one hit it as soon as it hit the water. I literally felt him grab the bait and start swimming off with it. Again, not a big one. Sometimes the Wacky rig doesn't catch big ones, but your hook sets are perfect every time, and those fish are coming in the boat, and it'll help you catch more fish, but we'll get him back and try and catch us another. Nice part about the Wacky rig is you can catch 1,000,000 fish. Like if you ever are struggling to catch fish, like I have been this trip down here in Florida so far, just pick up a Wacky rig. You're guaranteed to get some bites. See if we can get us another one. There's one. Another little guy. But a little quick tip for you guys that either fish in Florida or come down here and visit to fish in Florida. We're gonna throw him back. But you can notice that I've been milking this area now. I've literally been fishing around this dock for 30 minutes, just casting at every single piece of cover in here once I caught that one fish. If there's anything you need to know about Florida is that these fish get ganged up very heavily. So if you're getting a bite in an area, you need to stay and fish all the cover in that area because there could be a bunch of those 12 inchers or there could be an area with some big ones nearby. So that's why I'm fishing this cover so effectively and thoroughly before we move on to the next area. There we go. Alrighty, another little guy. But now that you know all the tricks to catch more fish on a Wacky rig, make sure you check out this video right here so you can see some of the mistakes you want to avoid when fishing a Wacky rig to catch a lot of fish just like this. So make sure you hit that subscribe button down below so you don't miss any of my weekly fishing tips coming up on how to catch more bass. We'll see you on the next one.